Before smartphones, before Wi-Fi, before anyone said content, America was alive in color, polyester, and cigarette smoke. Kids rode in the backs of pickup trucks. Parents smoked in the kitchen. Gas lines stretched for blocks, but nobody honked. It was loud, messy, dangerous, and beautiful. This is 100 Forgotten Things from 1970s America. A decade when the world danced, burned, and believed it was building the future. The 1970s didn't just arrive. They oozed in like sunlight through orange curtains. Everything felt warmer, slower, and somehow more alive. The world moved to the hum of muscle cars, the crackle of vinyl, and the buzz of conversation over corded phones. Life was tactile. Phones clicked, cars roared, cameras whirred, and letters were sealed with real stamps and waiting hearts. Homes glowed in avocado green and burnt orange, and every room carried the faint scent of cigarettes, coffee, and carpet fibers that seemed to trap yesterday inside them. You didn't scroll, you wandered. Down sidewalks lined with chrome bumpers, into diners where the jukebox played your favorite song, into nights lit by the soft lava lamp glow. The 70s weren't perfect. They were loud, smoky, and unfiltered, but that's what made them real. It was a decade that believed in itself, danced through uncertainty, and found beauty in imperfection. When the oil crisis hit in the 1970s, America slowed down, literally. Gas lines curled around city blocks like waiting serpents of steel and chrome. Engines were off, windows rolled down, radios playing softly while people sat in silence, patience, or quiet conversation. Some brought thermoses of coffee, others played cards on dashboards, all waiting for that moment when the pump clicked and life could move again. There was frustration, yes, but also something strangely communal about it. Strangers sharing cigarettes, news, or just a knowing glance that said, "We're all in this together." Gas signs flipped daily, prices jumped overnight, and suddenly every drive had to be planned. Families cancelled road trips, neighbors carpooled, and compact cars became the new American dream. The nation that once defined freedom by horsepower learned a different kind of endurance. The kind that didn't come from speed, but from waiting. And somehow, in those long, fuel-scented mornings, America found a rhythm in stillness. Proof that even when the world slows to a crawl, people can find connection in the pause. In the 1970s, the car wasn't just transportation, it was identity. A gleaming badge of pride parked in every driveway, a chrome-coated declaration of who you were and where you were headed. The Chevy Impala, Ford LTD, and Cutlass Supreme ruled the roads like floating kingdoms of steel. Long hoods, wide seats, and soft suspensions made every ride feel like a cruise through your own personal empire. You didn't just drive, you glided. The wheel felt heavy in your hands, the turn signals clicked like a heartbeat, and the smell of vinyl mixed with gasoline and aftershave. Rolling down the window meant effort, a crank of the wrist, a small workout just to feel the wind. Ashtrays were built into every door, cigarette smoke curling into sunlight as the radio hummed out Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles. Road trips weren't about the destination. They were about the motion, the open highway, the hum of the engine, the steady blur of telephone poles racing past. Cars weren't machines. They were extensions of the people inside them, symbols of freedom, rebellion, and weekend escape. In the 70s, the open road was more than pavement. It was possibility. Home in the 1970s was a world of color, comfort, and contradiction. Every living room was wrapped in wood paneling and deep shag carpet that swallowed your feet and hummed with static electricity. Avocado green refrigerators stood proudly beside burnt orange countertops, while floral wallpaper climbed the kitchen walls like a jungle. Plastic covered the good couches, macrame plant hangers framed every window, and a glass bowl of purple grapes sat eternally untouched on the coffee table. Families gathered around boxy televisions with rabbit ears wrapped in aluminum foil, the glow flickering across brown drapes and brass lamps. The hum of an air purifier mixed with the scent of coffee, cigarettes, and something baking in the oven. Nothing matched, yet somehow everything belonged together, chaos that felt warm. On weekends, dads mowed lawns in tube socks, moms clipped coupons at the kitchen table, and neighbors waved from driveways painted in sun-faded chalk. Home wasn't a showroom. It was a heartbeat. It smelled like dinner, echoed with laughter, and looked exactly like the world you never wanted to leave. The 1970s were the dawn of everyday technology, a decade when the future hummed, beeped, and blinked in red LED lights. The first digital watches made kids feel like secret agents, pressing a tiny button to reveal glowing numbers that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Pong turned living rooms into futuristic arcades where two rectangles and a square dot could mesmerize families for hours. Polaroid cameras captured memories in seconds, the image slowly surfacing like magic while everyone gathered around to watch. Typewriters clacked with confidence, correction tape hissed in frustration, and film projectors clicked through school reels that jammed more often than they played. The CB radio was social media before social media. Truckers and teenagers trading 10-4 good buddy across the airwaves. Every gadget, every toy felt like a glimpse into tomorrow, a promise that the world was getting smarter and faster. But behind all the wires and dials was wonder, the pure, electric thrill of touching the future for the first time. The soundtrack of the 1970s was the pulse of the decade, a mix of rebellion, rhythm, and pure soul. Every car stereo carried the thump of bass from an 8-track tape jammed into the dashboard, clicking loudly before Stevie Wonder or Fleetwood Mac filled the air. Radios blared Casey Kasem's Top 40 countdown, where every song felt like a personal anthem. In bedrooms, vinyl records spun endlessly, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Eagles, while the glow of lava lamps swayed to the beat. The disco ball became a symbol of escape, scattering light across roller rinks and dance floors where polyester shimmered and people moved like the night would never end. On TV, Happy Days made everyone wish they were the Fonz. Charlie's Angels redefined cool, and Roots made the country stop and think. Then came Star Wars exploding across theaters like nothing the world had ever seen. A blast of imagination that rewrote what movies could be. Pop culture in the 70s wasn't background noise. It was the heartbeat of a restless generation. It gave people rhythm when life was uncertain, heroes when reality felt gray, and a soundtrack that still echoes through every nostalgic radio dial today. The 1970s dressed loud and lived louder. It was a decade where fashion wasn't about rules, it was about attitude. Bell-bottoms swept the sidewalks like denim waves, each flare wider than the last. Platform shoes added inches of confidence, while polyester leisure suits shimmered under disco lights in every shade from baby blue to burnt orange. Hair had volume, feathered, teased, and sprayed into gravity-defying perfection. Farrah Fawcett's swooping bangs and John Travolta's slick curls became the decade's holy grail of style. Mood rings promised emotional truth on your finger, even if they mostly stayed the same color. Pet rocks sat proudly on desks like absurd status symbols, while peace signs and smiley faces decorated everything from iron-on patches to lunchboxes. Plastic flower decals bloomed on vans, mirrors, and bedroom doors, their colors fading but never dying. In the 70s, clothes weren't just worn, they performed. Every outfit said something, every accessory had flair. It was the era when fashion stopped whispering and started to dance. The kitchens of 1970s America were bright, bold, and a little bit strange. A world where avocado green appliances and burnt orange countertops turned every meal into a retro masterpiece. Dinner smelled like casseroles, pot roast, and instant mashed potatoes, served on patterned plates that never quite matched. Jell-O wasn't just dessert. It was an experiment, layered, molded, sometimes hiding carrots or marshmallows inside. Tang promised astronaut flavor. Tab and Fresca fizzed with futuristic confidence, and everyone believed diet soda was basically health food. Fast food wasn't an everyday thing. A trip to McDonald's or Pizza Hut was an event, complete with waxy wrappers and milkshakes so thick they bent your straw. Mums wrote grocery lists on the backs of envelopes, clipped coupons with military precision, and filled the house with the smell of coffee brewing from a percolator. Lunchboxes rattled with thermoses of soup and bologna sandwiches smashed flat by the juice box. Even snacks had ritual. TV dinners eaten on folding trays, popcorn made on the stove, Kool-Aid stirred with a wooden spoon. Food in the 70s wasn't perfect, but it had personality, a blend of convenience, curiosity, and comfort that somehow made everything taste like home. Growing up in the 1970s meant living in a world that balanced freedom with simplicity. Mornings started with the jingle of cereal commercials and the glow of Saturday morning cartoons, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, or the Jetsons buzzing from the boxy TV while kids sat cross-legged on shag carpet, spoons in hand. School days had their own rhythm, chalk dust in the air, film projectors clicking through health videos, and worksheets fresh from the mimeograph machine that smelled like sweet purple ink. Lunch came packed in metal boxes, bologna sandwiches, apples, and cookies flattened by thermoses, while recess meant scraped knees and kickball in the street until someone yelled, "Car!" Fire drills were rehearsed like theater, with kids filing out single file, half giggling, half serious. Homework meant pencils, paper, and sometimes tears. No screens, no shortcuts. After school, kids rode bikes without helmets, built forts from scrap wood, and didn't come home until the streetlights blinked on. It was a childhood without passwords or GPS, guided instead by instinct, curiosity, and the promise of being home in time for dinner. Family life in 1970s America was built on connection, the kind that didn't need Wi-Fi or notifications. Evenings meant everyone gathered around the television, sharing popcorn from a glass bowl, while the glow of the screen filled the room. Phone calls were anchored by cords that stretched down hallways, and sometimes you'd pick up to hear a stranger. A reminder that the party line wasn't always yours alone. Neighbors dropped by unannounced, borrowing sugar or returning Tupperware, and nobody thought it was strange to leave the front door unlocked. Letters carried emotions better than texts ever could, and postcards from road trips arrived like treasures from another world. CB radios crackled with voices from across town, 10-4 good buddy, blending small talk with adventure. Parents clipped coupons at the kitchen table, while kids played outside until dark, shouting through the twilight as porch lights flicked on one by one. Weekends were for backyard barbecues, drive-in movies, and roller rinks, where laughter echoed louder than the music. It was a time when togetherness wasn't scheduled, it just happened, and the world felt smaller, kinder, and infinitely closer. The culture of the 1970s was a whirlwind, patriotic, rebellious, and endlessly curious. The decade opened with protests and ended with disco balls, but somewhere in between, America rediscovered itself. In 1976, the bicentennial turned every street red, white, and blue. Parades rolled through small towns, fireworks filled the sky, and the nation celebrated its 200th birthday with pride that felt almost childlike. Yet just 2 years earlier, the country had held its breath as Nixon resigned. Black and white TVs flickering with history, living rooms heavy with silence as adults stared and kids sensed the world shifting. The Gong Show turned television into chaos. Saturday Night Fever made everyone a dancer, and streaking, yes, actual public streaking, became a bizarre symbol of freedom. Roller discos pulsed with light and laughter. Drive-ins fogged with popcorn steam and teenage dreams. Roots forced difficult conversations. Star Wars blew the roof off imagination, and American Pie floated from radios like a national anthem for everyone who didn't quite understand what had changed. The 70s were contradictions, patriotic yet disillusioned, innocent yet daring. A decade where culture wasn't just watched or heard, but felt in every living room, classroom, and street parade. The 1970s were a decade you could feel. Every texture, every sound, every scent etched into memory. The air carried a cocktail of gasoline, hairspray, and freshly mowed grass, drifting through open car windows and over backyard fences. Homes hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic whir of box fans, while the soft crackle of a vinyl record spun somewhere in the background. Carpets were deep and shaggy, trapping static electricity that snapped your fingertips. Every living room had its soundtrack, the click-clack of a typewriter, the thunk of an ice cube tray lever, the hiss of a percolator, the distant laughter of kids outside. Cigarette smoke curled lazily in sunbeams, mixing with the smell of coffee, newspaper ink, and dinner in the oven. Colors weren't subtle. They shouted harvest gold, avocado green and orange so bold it seemed alive. Even the darkness had a glow, from lava lamps, bug zappers, and television snow that danced long after midnight. Life in the 70s wasn't quiet or clean. It was noisy, tactile, and gloriously imperfect. It was a world that didn't just surround you, it touched you. In the 1970s, happiness wasn't something you chased. It was built into the rhythm of ordinary life. Joy lived in the small, familiar rituals that filled every day. It was the clatter of the newspaper hitting the porch at dawn, the click of the TV dial finding your favorite channel, the scent of dinner drifting down the hallway. Summer nights buzzed with the hum of bug zappers, kids chasing lightning bugs in glass jars, while parents talked under the soft glow of citronella candles. Saturday mornings meant cartoons and cereal mountains, and Sunday afternoons meant washing the car in the driveway with the radio playing just loud enough to sing along. Making a mixtape off the radio felt like magic, timing every button press, capturing songs with a DJ's voice still bleeding through. Families sat together for dinner, neighbors waved from porches, and letters from faraway friends felt like treasures. Life wasn't instant. It took time, effort, and patience, but that's what made it rich. The beauty of the 70s wasn't in the grand moments, but in the quiet, steady ones that made ordinary life feel extraordinary. The 1970s left behind more than bell-bottoms and disco lights. It left lessons. It was a decade that taught a generation how to adapt, to find patience in gas lines and joy in the ordinary. People learned that connection didn't need a signal, just a front porch and a little time. They discovered that imperfection had charm. A scratch on a vinyl, a crooked photo, a hand-me-down couch. The world moved slower, but hearts beat closer. The 70s reminded us that progress doesn't always mean better, that sometimes comfort lives in the analog hum of simpler days. From the way families gathered around a single glowing TV to the way neighbors waved without fear, the decade carved into memory a truth that still holds power today. Life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. It just needs to be real. Before plastic molds and automatic ice makers, there was the mighty metal ice cube tray, a small but unforgettable piece of 1970s kitchen engineering. It sat heavy and cold in the freezer, filled to the brim with cloudy water that froze into stubborn, welded cubes. Getting them out was an event. You'd grab the handle, take a breath, and pull the lever like you were launching something into orbit. It cracked with a metallic snap so loud it echoed through the kitchen, shards of ice flying, fingers freezing, and laughter following. Sometimes the cube stuck anyway, and you'd bang the tray on the counter until victory, or frostbite, was achieved. Kids loved the noise. Adults loved the ritual. That sound, half clank, half crunch, was part of the rhythm of daily life. No one called it inconvenient. It was just how things were done, and in its own way, that stubborn little tray captured the spirit of the era, solid, imperfect, built to last, and strangely satisfying every single time. In every 1970s waiting room, from the dentist's office to the car mechanic, there sat a plastic pitcher on a folding table, forever stained by Tang or Kool-Aid. The lid never quite fit, the spout always dribbled, and the color, orange or pink, had seeped into the plastic for good. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfort, a sweet, lukewarm reminder that even waiting could taste a little like home. In the 1970s, the glass ashtray was as common as the salt shaker, thick, floral, and always cold to the touch. Even in homes where no one smoked, one sat proudly on the coffee table, a symbol of hospitality more than habit. It caught coins, candy wrappers, and the occasional matchstick, its edges glinting in the lamplight. It wasn't decoration, it was expectation. A silent relic of a world where smoke and conversation always seemed to linger together. Every 1970s home had at least one macrame plant hanger, knotted with love and dangling proudly in the sunlight. Crafted from thick beige rope and holding a spider plant or fern, they swayed gently whenever a breeze slipped through the window. Part decoration, part meditation, they turned every corner into a tiny jungle. Each one carried a bit of homemade soul, proof that even rope and patience could become art. Every 1970s waiting room had a small stack of Reader's Digest magazines, their covers faded and corners curled from years of patient hands. The pages smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, filled with jokes, family stories, and articles that made time pass just a little easier. You never planned to read them, but somehow everyone did. In a world before smartphones, Reader's Digest was the quiet companion of every waiting chair. In the 1970s, sidewalks glittered with the tiny trophies of America's soda obsession. Aluminum pull tabs popped from cans and flicked away without a thought. They skittered across pavement, glinting in the sun like accidental jewelry. Nobody picked them up, nobody cared. They were just part of the scenery. A sparkling reminder that even the smallest leftovers of life could catch the light. Earth shoes were the 1970s answer to enlightenment through footwear. Chunky, heavy, and oddly shaped with soles that slanted downward from heel to toe. They promised better posture, balance, and even inner peace, though most people just looked like they were walking uphill backward. Still, believers wore them proudly, convinced that comfort and consciousness began at the feet. When the classroom lights dimmed and the clunky film projector rolled in, every kid sat up a little straighter. Threading the film through its maze of reels felt like delicate surgery. One wrong move and the strip would snap or jam. Then came the click, the hum, and the faint flicker on the screen. For 10 glorious minutes, learning felt like magic. Every classroom in the 1970s turned into a workshop of color when the holidays came around. Kids sat at their desks, cutting strips of red, green, orange, or black construction paper, looping and gluing them into long chains that draped across chalkboards and windows. The glue stuck to fingers. The loops were never perfect, but that didn't matter. Those paper chains made every room feel festive, proof that a little effort and a lot of imagination could make magic out of paper. In the 1970s, the ultimate symbol of responsibility wasn't a briefcase, it was the pocket protector. Dads wore them proudly in their crisp short-sleeve button-ups, a lineup of pens, pencils, and maybe a small ruler tucked neatly inside. It wasn't fashion. It was function. Ink stains were the enemy, order was the goal. And that little plastic sleeve said everything about a man who meant business. Visiting Grandma's house in the 1970s meant stepping into a museum of preservation. The couch was always perfect, shiny under its thick plastic armor that crackled and stuck to your legs in summer. Carpet runners guarded the floor like sacred paths, leading safely through rooms you weren't supposed to touch. Every crinkle and squeak reminded you that nothing in this house was to be wasted or worn out. It wasn't just furniture, it was history, wrapped in protection and love. Before Coinstar machines and digital deposits, saving change was a hands-on ritual. Families spent quiet evenings at the kitchen table, sorting pennies, nickels, and dimes into little paper sleeves that had to be filled just right. Not one coin more, not one less. Kids helped count, adults double-checked, and when the rolls were neatly stacked, they felt like treasure. Walking into the bank with that bundle of homemade currency wasn't just a chore. It was proof that patience still paid. The 1970s were built on a quiet kind of trust, the kind that didn't need alarms, passwords, or cameras. People hitchhiked with cardboard signs and open smiles, believing most strangers were friends they hadn't met yet. Front doors stayed unlocked, neighbors walked in without knocking, and party lines meant sharing phone conversations with whoever picked up first. It was imperfect, sometimes messy, but it worked, because back then community wasn't an idea, it was a habit. In the 1970s, the news didn't shout. It spoke. Anchors like Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, and John Chancellor looked straight into the camera and told you what happened, without theme music, flashing banners, or breaking alerts. Their calm voices carried a kind of quiet authority that made the world feel steady, even when it wasn't. The set was simple. A desk, a microphone, and trust. And somehow that was all it took to believe you were hearing the truth. The 1970s had a wild sense of humor, strange, fearless, and delightfully absurd. Streaking across live TV became a national pastime, greeted not with outrage but applause and laughter. The Gong Show turned chaos into art, where bad acts, weird judges, and mid-performance gongs made every episode unpredictable. Meanwhile, National Lampoon magazines pushed the limits of satire, mixing clever wit with mischief that parents pretended not to notice. It was an era when comedy stopped asking for permission, and America loved every second of the madness. The 1970s were a decade of transformation, where old rules unraveled and new voices took the stage. Shows like Charlie's Angels brought fierce, confident women into living rooms across America, blending glamour with independence. Disco gave everyone permission to shine, sequins, silk, and freedom twirling under mirror balls. Youth fashion broke boundaries with color, movement, and self-expression that refused to apologize. It was a time when a generation discovered that identity wasn't something inherited. It was something you could create. The 1970s were bound together by moments everyone shared. The kind that froze time across every living room in America. Families huddled around televisions to watch reruns of the moon landing, still in awe that humans had touched the stars. The bicentennial brought a wave of red, white, and blue pride, parades, fireworks, and a rare feeling of unity. Then came Nixon's resignation, and for once, the country went quiet. No cheering, no anger, just the heavy stillness of realizing history had changed right before their eyes. In 1970s schools, fire drills weren't chaos. They were choreography. The bell rang, teachers grabbed clipboards, and students lined up in single file without panic or noise. It wasn't about fear. It was about following the plan. Outside, kids squinted in the sun, whispered to friends, and waited for the all clear like it was just another break from math. Safety was serious, but calm was part of the lesson. Nothing electrified a classroom in the 1970s quite like the sight of a bulky TV cart rumbling through the door. The metal wheels squeaked, the straps rattled, and every kid instantly knew today there'd be no quiz. The teacher plugged it in, adjusted the antenna, and the fuzzy picture flickered to life. Whether it was a space launch, a nature documentary, or just an educational film, those moments felt like a tiny holiday. Learning had never looked so good. In the 1970s, the TV dial was more than a control. It was a throne of power. Only one person, usually Dad, had the unspoken right to turn it. Each click made a heavy clunk, and you had to stand close, adjusting rabbit ears until the picture stopped dancing. Kids knew better than to touch it without asking. Changing the channel on your own was practically rebellion. In every home, that dial ruled the living room like royalty in chrome. Before buttons and automatic hums, rolling down a car window was a small workout. You'd grab the crank handle and spin it in circles, feeling the glass glide lower with every turn. It squeaked, clicked, and sometimes stuck halfway, but that was part of the charm. Getting the perfect breeze took effort, and when it finally hit just right, it felt earned. Simple mechanics, pure satisfaction, no batteries required. In kitchens across 1970s America, drawers overflowed with S&H Green Stamps, tiny green squares that promised rewards nobody ever seemed to claim. Families pasted them carefully into booklets, dreaming of toasters, blenders, or maybe a new lamp from the catalog. But somehow the redemption trip never happened. The stamps just piled up, curling at the edges, silent symbols of thrift and good intentions. Saving them felt like progress, even if the prize never came. Before store-bought supplies and designer folders, 1970s kids made their own book covers out of brown grocery bags. Scissors, a few folds and some tape turned yesterday's shopping into today's protection for math or history class. The best part came after, decorating the blank canvas with doodles, stickers, and bubble letter names. It was creativity, recycling, and pride all in one, proof that even homework could have personality. Before apps and barcode scanners, grocery shopping in the 1970s was a handwritten operation. Moms clipped coupons from the Sunday paper and scribbled shopping lists on the backs of old envelopes or receipts. Each trip down the aisle felt like a mission, comparing brands, counting cents, stretching every dollar. The crumpled envelope was more than a list. It was a map of the week's meals and the quiet art of making do. The 1970s didn't fade away. They lingered, like the hum of a record long after the needle lifts. It was a decade of contradictions, loud yet gentle, simple yet full of change. Life wasn't digital or polished. It was textured, imperfect, and beautifully human. People trusted more, waited longer, and found joy in the smallest rituals. A hand-cranked window, a note in the mail, a song on the radio. Those years taught us that comfort isn't in convenience but in connection. That happiness doesn't come from having everything. It comes from feeling everything. And even now, when we look back through the haze of film grain and memory, we can still hear it. The laughter, the music, the heartbeat of a world that moved slower, but somehow felt closer.